Welcome to the very last of this series of the Iowa Files. My name is Gail Brubaker. I'm the Executive Director of the West Des Moines Historical Society, and we would absolutely love for you to cut through our debt and make donations after this. Sorry, that was incredibly tacky. I'm really sorry. We're all tacky. I just want to thank and acknowledge our sponsors, the West Des Moines Public Library, the Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Public Library, the amazing Tracy Glass, who is the queen of the library, sitting back there helping us today, Polk County Supervisors, Bravo Greater Des Moines, and our members and donors. I am not going to do a big fluffy entrance because I think these folks can speak for themselves better than I can. But thank you for supporting the history preservation of West Des Moines and in Iowa. And make sure you ask questions today, okay? All right.
Okay. My name is Kelly Rundle. My wife Tammy is in the back by the closet there. Wave, Tammy. We are the producers of the documentary Villisca, Living with a Mystery, a project that we created over a 10-year period, some time in the recent past, not so recent, but. So I'm going to attempt to be your moderator or host today. Dr. Ed Epperly is here with us, and Ed, yes, get a hand for Dr. Epperly. So we've been acquainted with Ed for a long time. We're going to talk a little bit about our film, and we're going to talk a little bit about his book, mainly about his book. His wife, Joyce, is in the back at the book sale table. Thank you for being here, Joyce. I want to thank Gail Brubaker for inviting us. She's with the West Des Moines Historical Society, so we're really grateful to be here. We haven't done anything quite like this before. We have a couple of technical things we're juggling, so bear with us. Hopefully it all works okay. I'm going to find a sweet spot here, possibly. We do have books and DVDs for sale, so please consider buying one if you are interested in learning more about the story. I mentioned there were some technical things, so we're good. I want to take you back now to, I'm going to go off book a little bit. Tammy's not going to like that because she writes out very specific things for me to say. But when the documentary was in distribution here in the Midwest, we premiered it at the State Historical Building, and over 1,000 people came to see it on the opening weekend. And then the film was in Midwestern theaters for a little over a year, about 14 months. And I got an email during the course of that from a gentleman from Marshalltown. And he said, "We went to see your film tonight at the multiplex." And he said, my wife dragged me. I did not want to see the film. And he said, but I really enjoyed the film, and I just wanted to tell you that. He said, however, when we got home, my wife made me go in the house first. And she made me go through every room in the house and turn the light on before she would come in. She was even a little bit leery about walking from the parking, to the parking lot in the dark. So, of course, I loved hearing all of that. But I want to take you back to Monday morning, June the 10th, 1912. And it was a day not unlike today. It was a little cloudy, actually. But a neighbor of the Josiah Moore family noticed an odd stillness early in the morning, and when there would have been activity around the house. And so she eventually got around to calling the murdered man's brother, and he came down, and then there were people who went into the house. And I'm going to ask Ed to talk a little bit about what they found that morning.
Is this going to work, you think?
It's going to work.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? That's good, because I can't talk much louder. The morning, as Kelly pointed out, was a cloudy day. And the first person who went in the house was Ross Moore, the brother of Joe Moore, who lived in the house, with his wife and 4 kids. And he went in the south door, pushed it open, and he said it was, he walked across the room and opened what we would think of as a back parlor or some kind of small house. And he could see two figures lying in bed, and they were completely covered with bedclothes, but there was blood on the bedstead behind them. And so he knew that this was not normal, and so he went out of the house. He called for help, and the town marshal, Hank Horton, came down. He stepped in the same door and struck a match. That'd be an Ohio blue tip, I imagine, and he probably struck it on his trousers or popped it with his thumb. And he said that it was dark as night in the house. All of the shades were pulled down to the sill, and even the glass in the front door had been covered with a skirt that he didn't know it was a killer yet, but that's what it was. And so he went into that back room, and he pulled the covers back, and here were two. He couldn't tell. He thought one might be a woman and a child, the other one, or it might be two children, one somewhat older, and they had been struck in the head with an axe. Not the axe you saw going around the room, but an axe nonetheless. And he had a fellow trailing behind him who had come down also, a person. The murdered man lived or worked as a owner of a implement dealership. And one of his workers had come down, been called because they were trying to find where he was and why he wasn't out and back to work and things like that. It would have been about 8:30 when this is taking place in the morning. And so he said to the fellow with him, "Come on, let's go upstairs." And that fellow said, "No, I'm not going." I think I always felt, as an implement employee, I don't get paid for this kind of stuff. You're a marshal. And so he went up. It's a very narrow, curved, S-curve stairway, leads off the kitchen up to the upstairs. And there in the first room, which would be the north room of the northwest corner of the house, upstairs, you found Joe and his wife, Sarah, and they had been struck with an axe. They were the most mutilated of any of the victims. Everything was gone in Joe's face and back to the back of the skull, and she had been struck repeatedly with the blade. She's the only person in the house that was struck with the blade of the axe, and it produced a series of cuts in the face. And then he went in the south room and he found the four more children. They were arranged in a room and struck in the head like everyone else. All of them were covered over. All of them had face cloths placed on their face after they'd been killed. And the house was completely closed. Doors were locked. Windows were pulled down. There was the axe was leaning against the wall in the basement, in the downstairs room where the two girls, they were visiting that night. They were not part of the family. And Stillinger was their name. And then there was a dresser with a mirror on the dresser cupboard. Actually, we don't have that there. Finally, there was a lamp at the foot of the bed with the chimney gone. They found the chimney underneath the thing. And finally, there was about a 4-pound piece of slab bacon wrapped up in a cheesecloth leaning against the south wall beside the axe. And that's the Villisca murder. I mean, that's what the people found when they went through the house. A lot of people went through the house, and a lot of people have rumored different things, but basically that's what they found.
So as we've traveled around with our film in various places, one of the most common questions is how did you learn about this story, or what got you interested in it? And for us, it was we saw Ed on a television program being interviewed about the axe murder story, and it just seemed incredible almost stranger than fiction. So Ed, I think, gets the same question, right, Ed? How did you learn about this? So later, after we finished this film, we did a short film about Ed called Axeman. And we're going to show you, that's in all caps. And if you go out into the parking lot, you'll find his license plate, Axeman, okay?
My wife buys that license plate. I don't.
But this will be a short clip about how Ed got involved.
Well, this was taken the day we left for you and I. I think we're in Leon, Iowa. Our first adventure in the larger world. We were all social science majors. I remember we were riding around, it must have been a Sunday afternoon. We were all three taking a course in Iowa history. We were talking about the fact there was a paper assigned. Well, what are you going to write on? Oh, I don't know. And one of us said, why don't we do that? And it was a topic we had heard of all our life. Well, could we all three do it? So we hatched the proposal, and we would do original research. We would try to get to the original documents and interview some of the people who were involved. We were excited on the way down, nervous, and not sure how we would be received. But we were there all day. One of us went to the newspaper. One of us went to the library. Another one located the scene. Then we got a list of people that had some kind of direct involvement with the case, and again we divided up the tasks. It was an event of sufficient proportion that everybody who lived in that 100-mile radius knew something about it. Yeah, it involved violence, murder, intrigue, mystery, uncertainty of who might have been involved and what motive was behind it, those kind of things. It became a hobby, something I could do whenever I had free time, and it was a big enough event that it filled my life.
The undertakers would not remove the bodies until the county coroner released them. And so the series of events postponed it, and so the bodies were finally physically removed nearly midnight on Monday night, the 10th of June.
And of course they got the lights on right away, because that argument was a small matter after this happened.
In the wake of his murder, Joe Moore's hardware business competitors were overrun by customers.
People bought guns all over the place. They bought locks and bolts, and of course the hardware stores ran out of them.
We all stepped upstairs, and we had an attic off from our long closet and had a little lock on it. Mama every night would look to see if that lock was still on there. I could see the house from our place, and the house is just built almost like my mom and dad's. Sometimes I didn't want my folks to live there because that house is too much like the Moore home.
They used to tie strings on tin cans
so that any intruder coming into the yard at night would make this rattling noise.
Well, of course, any stray animal would do that.
The people would keel over in a dead faint as the cans start rattling, and it's not funny, because the sense of fear gripping a little town was, I think, probably the most vivid impression I had.
Always after that, when we were away someplace and came home, Dad would always take the lantern in first and look through the closets, and then Mom and us children would all follow in.
Some families, according to the Villisca Review, began to live together in terms of 3 or 4 in the face of dangers.
I talked to a young fellow that was young at the time. He was a 18-year-old farmhand out south of town and lived with a Swedish family, and so they put the whole family in the back bedroom and locked the door, and they put him in the front bedroom and didn't allow him to lock the door. The idea being that the killer would have to fight his way through the hired man, and that noise would awaken the family.
There was the beginning of the mythology immediately afterwards, and part of the mythology was sort of an exaggeration. This was, according to one newspaper, the most horrible event that had occurred in the history of the United States. Well, and then that goes on. It goes on to now there was the worst terror there. However, I have the feeling that people were pretty afraid, and they didn't know where this came from, and more than that, they couldn't explain the evil that it suggested.
With no suspects in custody, people in Villisca and the county turned to each other for information.
The stories got bigger and bigger, but some of them took on an interest of their own. One that surprised me was the idea that the picture of the assailant was imprinted like a photographic plate on the eye of the victim.
Mrs. Moore, they felt that she had her eye open when she was struck, and like a camera image, it would remain.
And I thought, my God, who would believe that? And we have the persistence of vision. If you have light hitting your eye and then you look away, you see the source of the light again. And so there are some grounds that there is a chemical persistence in the eye.
So the first rumor was that her eye was being sent to the State University in Iowa City to be analyzed, and they would get a photograph, a print made from it, so they'd have a photograph of the killer. The second rumor was that they had sent her whole head. None of that, of course, was true. One, the image doesn't remain in the eye, and secondly, she didn't have any eyes, actually, after the killer had struck.
It was absolutely without foundation in fact. But it was reported in a number of newspapers, and then the weekly newspapers would pick up that story, and pretty soon it was all through Iowa.
Okay, so obviously that clip was about the fear that gripped the community in the wake of something they had no reason to understand what had happened. And in addition to taking the various steps that you saw depicted in the film there, people started looking back to, well, what had happened yesterday or the day before, and kind of trying to figure out, well, what led up to this? And I'm going to ask Ed to read a passage from his book at this point.
Had Mike been prowling the downtown alleys, maybe I better use that.
Good idea.
Had Mike been prowling the downtown alleys during the time he was sitting in the park, he might have seen the one suspicious event of the night. Just a little background, Mike was a night marshal, and on the night of the murder, he did chores and rattled doors and things like that, and then he sat for 4 hours out in the Central Park. It's not a courthouse, it's not a county seat, but it's an open park downtown, and he could see all of the downtown business, or most of it, from that place. That's what led into this. He might have seen the one suspicious event of the night. Xenia Delaney was also napping on a cot that June night. She was the night telephone operator for the Mutual Telephone System. 20 years old in 1912, she had started working for the telephone company in 1908. The telephone exchange was located 1/2 block south of the town square in the upstairs room above Ross Moore's drugstore. Ross Moore's the brother, remember? His store was bordered on the south by an alley. Xenia got to her upstairs office by mounting a cast iron outside stairway. Still there, but you can't climb it anymore. It's falling off the wall. Since calls of only dire emergency came through after midnight, the exchange was equipped with a cot, so the night operator could nap while waiting for the call that seldom came. The outside stairs had 3 loose steps. Xenia was awakened when the first step creaked. Lying on the cot, she heard each of the other 2 steps protest as somebody quietly climbed the stairs. She heard the outside door open softly, followed by light footfalls in the hall. Finally, her visitor mounted the 3 steps to the exchange door. In the dim glow of her nightlight, she watched the doorknob slowly turn. And when you buy the book, you can find out what I'll be around afterwards. I'll answer that one. I never can resist that.
So the next thing we want to talk about are the suspects. And I'm just going to briefly mention one of them, who was a local man, a state senator named Frank Fernando Jones. Now, he was a significant figure in the community. He was a banker, as I mentioned, a state senator. And you might wonder, well, why would he be a suspect? And there were two reasons that people presented as why he was a suspect. And the first was that he was a business competitor of the murdered man. So Jones was in the farm implement business, and Joe, the murdered man, had worked for him for a time. And then Joe was lured away by Deere and Company, I think just called John Deere in those days. And so he left Senator Jones' employ and opened up a competing implement store featuring the Deere line right across the corner. I mean, right on the same corner, the southeast corner of the square. In addition to that, and this is somewhat related to the telephone operators, maybe we can get into that later as to how people understood this, but it was understood in town that Joe was having an affair with the senator's daughter-in-law. So for people thinking about conventional motives, locals thought Senator Jones was probably guilty. And not that he did it himself, but that he hired someone to do it. That's like everything about this story, it's very complex. So I won't go further than that. Our goal here is to have about 20 minutes at the end where you can ask any questions that you want. And Ed is worth asking these questions, so you're going to get an answer. But we're going to briefly then talk about the other two theories, and I'm going to ask Ed to do that, if he would.
The original theory that was in the first week after the murder was that it was a serial killer because there had been a murder in Colorado Springs a year before, not a little less than a year. And then another one 2 weeks later in Monmouth, Illinois, and 2 weeks after that, this is all in the fall of 1911, in Ellsworth, Kansas. And then on the Wednesday before the Sunday night murder in Villisca, there was a murder in Paola, Kansas, which is south of Kansas City. And Villisca was the fifth murder. And they got together, sheriffs, policemen from those towns, met in Villisca the week of the murder, discussed it. The problem they had was some of them thought the murders were just alike, and others thought there were really quite a lot of difference between them. I think all of them agreed that the Monmouth murder, which involved 3 people, and the Villisca murder, they were the closest alike. The accounts you read about this don't tell you why they thought they were most alike. But anyway, that theory died within the first month because it didn't lead anywhere. What do you do? You know, in those days, how do you trace somebody? No income tax, no credit cards, no phones, none of that. And so you had to wait till the killer struck again. And that was frustrating, and people started looking around for alternatives. The police had an alternative, but nobody knew about that because they were not talking about it. They wanted to develop it more. There had been a minister come to town on Saturday night before the Sunday night murder. And he was a man named Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly. Tiny little man, 5'2", and weighed 119 pounds when he was arrested. He had been there. He had been a Methodist preacher from England, immigrated to the United States. His wife came with him. They had been there since 1904. He had preached all over the Midwest. He started out in North Dakota in the Methodist Church. He moved to Minnesota, he moved to Iowa, he moved to Nebraska, he moved to Kansas, he moved to Oklahoma, came back to Nebraska. And in 1912, in the spring, 2 months before the murder, he said, I'm leaving the Methodist Church. Man can starve to death working for the Methodists. He was going to join the Presbyterian Church. And so he had enrolled in a seminary in Omaha, and a Presbyterian seminary, and they got him a job in the summer, because he didn't have any money, he would be preaching in Macedonia, Iowa, which is like 50, 60 miles northwest of Villisca. And every other week, he would come to Villisca, and on Sunday, he would preach twice at two little Presbyterian congregations out in the country. And that's the first time he came, was the murder weekend. He attracted attention where he was staying. It was a Norwegian family, Anderson, and they had two young girls, preschool and maybe lower grades. I'm not sure about their age. I have to look that up. But anyway, they had supper, and then the mother and the grandmother were both upset about the way he related to the children. They didn't say what upset them, but it was something that caused anxiety. He was given a downstairs bedroom. The grandmother, she was so worried that she took a rocker out and put it in the upstairs hallway so that he couldn't sneak upstairs. She was afraid of him. And so in the morning, they talked about it. They said they heard him pacing in his room all night. And the grandmother said to the person who brought them there, said, don't ever bring that man back again. He's crazy. Well, he went to the Children's Day service that night, went home with the Presbyterian minister, stayed in the Presbyterian manse. All of the people in the Presbyterian household went out in the backyard and slept in a tent. That shows you what Presbyterians do. No, he did. They did it because the minister had a throat condition, and he thought the night air was better for it than the town. That left Kelly in the house alone. Kelly had established already that he was a window peeker. He was caught peeking in windows before that. And we don't know what he did between about 11 o'clock at night and the next morning. He left on the 5:19 train that left Villisca for Macedonia. The murder was discovered about 7:30, 7:45, something like that, maybe a little after that, before the word got out. Kelly rode to Macedonia. To do that, you go west on the CB&Q Amtrak line, and not then, but it is now. And he got off the train at Hastings Junction, got on a local train that was going from Sydney to Macedonia. And on that train were two of his parishioners who he recognized. And he came up and he said he was nervous. He put his hands on the seats. It's a wicker seats, they said. And he said the most terrible thing in the history of the world happened in Villisca last night. A whole family was wiped out. And that was about a little after 7 o'clock. The murder had not yet been discovered. The police found out about that because he was writing letters to everybody. He was obsessed with the murder. He talked about it all the time. He wrote letters to all of the officials associated with it, and the private detectives that were working on it. And he talked about the killer was disturbed because two people walked down the street when he was in the house, the killer. And they wondered, how did he know this? They also found out that he had sent a bloody shirt to a laundry in Council Bluffs the week of the murder. He sent it on Thursday after the murder had been found on Monday. And that they talked about, they meaning the authorities, the Iowa Attorney General and the county attorney, talked about, should we arrest him? Should we have a grand jury investigation? They decided not to because they weren't sure that they realized he was a bit mentally unstable. And so they consequently let him, they said, we know we can find him if we need to. In 1914, he was living in Winter, South Dakota, preaching with the Methodists again. He got kicked out of the Presbyterian Seminary because he hadn't paid his bills. It was a financial reason. But he, there he put an ad in the Omaha World Herald, said he wanted a secretary. And he got an application from a woman, 28-year-old woman in Council Bluffs. And he wrote back and said, you sound fine. I'd love to hire you. There is one condition, though. You have to type in the nude. A word like that get around, you should have all kinds of applications. Anyway, she turned it over to her pastor, who turned it over to the police, who turned it over to the postal authorities, and he was arrested for sending obscene material because they wrote some dummy letters to him saying, well, this sounds interesting, tell me more. And he did. He got progressively more salacious as his excitement rose, I guess. And consequently, he was arrested, convicted, and ruled insane, and so he was sent to the National Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C., St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Then he was released in 1915, and he had several charges like that against him, but people found out, the public found out about him talking about the murder early, and they finally did arrest him in the spring of 1917, May or June. And he was brought to trial in September. By this time, the town was absolutely convinced, I've said before, and I believe it, that they wouldn't have convicted anybody but F.F. Jones and his partner if Christ himself had testified for him. So the jury was convinced that Kelly was a mentally ill guy who might have imagined he did the murder. And so he was acquitted he had one vote for conviction by reason of insanity, or acquittal by reason of insanity, and 11 for acquittal. And so they had a second trial. That was a hung jury, and the second trial acquitted him. And then he's a viable suspect. So you really, people ask, well, who do you think did it? And I said, well, I think these two did. Serial killer or Kelly. I just don't know which.
Thank you, Ed. So we have just one more thing I'm going to ask Ed, because as he will testify to, I think, the Villisca axe murder story is connected to everything, it seems.
Yes.
So as we've gone around to different communities, usually there's a connection to that particular community. So Ed, real briefly, because we're about to do the Q&A, what are the Des Moines connections to the Villisca axe murder story?
There's absolutely no connection to mine. No, there are a lot of connections to Des Moines. First, the way the Iowa investigation, they had no BCI, DCI, whatever it's called at this time. It was formed somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat because of this murder. When the murder happened, the state attorney general was the chief policeman, of the state, really, and he had a few assistants. Some of them were not in regular employ, but could be drawn out and hired to work on it, and they did that. And he had a couple of assistant attorney generals who would handle cases. So they were involved from the very beginning. They sent their a man named Sampson, Harry Sampson. He came down and kind of participated in the investigation. The next level down is the county level, and that was a man named Radcliffe, who was a county attorney. He handled the local level. So from the very beginning, the state of Iowa, and that means Des Moines, because that's where all of them are housed, were involved in the investigation. Also, the Des Moines Register was involved, has been. In fact, one of the reasons that the story is remembered is that when times got slow at the Register, every 20 years or so, they would put out another rehashing of the Villisca case. 1930 was the most, it was a three-volume story, ran over 3 Sundays, and that might have been the Tribune, but it was the two kind of melded together. And in that investigation, they tried to rehash the entire case, and they had 10 years after the trials to do that, and that's probably the most complete summary of it from the newspaper. And then in 45, they had another story about it, and that one was helpful to me because that's how we got the axe. Don Brown, that was on the picture, he and I were still working on it, and I was looking at that. I found that 1945 article, and here stands a man named Risden, who became the second head of the BCI, Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and which was formed, by the way. One of the reasons was a guy named Klaus Anderson, who was a representative from Stanton, which is just outside of Villisca. He introduced, summer after the murder, he introduced an idea of why don't we pass a law that'll create a permanent investigative group who are under the control of the Attorney General, but they would be a professional group and they could handle cases like this. The urban Democrats opposed that. The rural Republicans supported it. And the reason was that the urban Democrats said, we don't have axe murders very often. We only have one that we knew of. And but we've got a lot of hassling people about drinking. And it was county option at that time. And so the urban areas could have alcohol and the rural areas didn't. And so they blocked that law for about 10 years and then they created it. Well, anyway, in the 45 paper, it shows Risden standing there holding the axe. And he says he's writing a book about it and he's got the axe. Don Brown was living in Des Moines then. I called him and said, I was living in Pella, and said, would you see if he's still in the phone directory? And he was. And so he called, and he got an elderly lady. And no, he's dead. He was my husband. Well, we have this picture from 1945, shows he had the axe. Do you still have the axe? Yes, I do. It's upstairs in a closet. And, well, would you sell it? And she said, oh, I'd give it away. Gives me the willies. And so Don went down and talked with her, got the axe, and we've identified it. It's got some markings on it, including markings of the trial, exhibits, and things like that. And so when they got with the axe, we got thinking about it, and well, we're going to have to prove this is the axe. So he went down with a notary public to get a notarized statement from her. She wouldn't accept any money, but we both felt guilty about it, and so we gave her a box of chocolate-covered cherries. And when I gave the axe to the Villisca Historical Society, originally where they transferred to the state, it's now back at Montgomery County History Center. But when we did that, I gave them the axe, and Susie Anderson reached out and gave me a box of children's government cherries.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, time to ask questions. We'll ask you to keep your question brief, so no stump speeches. But and then Ed, if you would repeat the question for the YouTube audience, that'd be great. Yes.
How much national news coverage did this event get?
Well, it made she asked how much national news coverage did it get? It made the New York Times. It was it was a squib. It wasn't a whole article. It got a lot of regional coverage. Every paper in Iowa have an article about it, I think. And then that extended into Nebraska and Kansas. And most of the towns that had the murders, Colorado and Kansas and Illinois, had a story. Is this the same as killer that we had? So it has always gotten news coverage. Now today, just go to your computer, if anybody's got a computer. Of course you do. But go to your computer and type in Villisca axe murder, and you can spend 6 months reading what's on there. If you want to shorten it, make it more useful to you and more correct, type my name in. And you'll get the real stuff there. Yes.
With today's new ways of finding DNA, could they take that axe and find any information?
No, I don't think so. I mean, she asked if with today's DNA research and all of that, could they find information from the axe? I sometimes jokingly answer that similar question with saying, no, like some people they used to ask, would they find blood on the axe? I said, no, I suspect they would find gravy stains, because I had it for 20 years and it was in my upstairs closet. It didn't give me the willies. And if we had people over for dinner, certainly sometime during the evening, do you really have that axe? And I would say, sure. You want to see it? Of course they did. And I'd go and get it. And we're at the dinner table. And so we passed it around. And that's why I thought it might have gravy stain. Actually, the blood would be from the victims. It'd be hard to separate. They did have a fingerprint expert come in, and he fingerprinted all the victims so that if he found a fingerprint, he could eliminate them. Other questions?
Yes, sir.
Ma'am.
What do you think about the haunted rumors or the ghost stories that have surrounded you?
Sure. She asked about the haunting, the house is haunted. That's, I don't, personally, I don't think I would recognize a ghost if I walk through one. But many, many people do. In fact, it's now in the hands, the house is now in the hands of a private company that is buying haunted sites in America. They've bought the Lizzie Borden house, for example. I think they bought one of the hotels that you hear about, and so on. And many, many people, if you go into your computer and look, the bulk of the people will be talking about experiences they had or they didn't have. Some say, well, I went through the house and I didn't feel anything. And others went through the house and they felt cold drafts and they felt the doors moved when there was no one there, and things like that. I've been in a house many times, as you might suspect. I've been in the house at midnight. We were filming in there at midnight once. But anyway, I haven't personally felt anything. But as I said, that's not been a part of my life. I don't read ghost stories, and it doesn't mean that other people believe it. I do have a little clip-in thing that suggests that there's been some research suggesting that older houses produce noises of a very low frequency, and so low that human ears can't hear them. But humans seem to sense them. This is a study that was done in Canada, and just a month ago it was released. And consequently, a lot of people with that sensitivity will step into a house like that and, I don't feel right. I mean, there's something about this place. That's an interesting thing to me, because that would give a completely different potential possibility. And if I cross swords with a person who believes that there are ghosts in the house, I can use that. But many people do, and I got some good help from a couple of paranormal investigative groups. That they are bright people, and they are friendly. We had long discussions, and they've made some interesting suggestions, and I've given them some suggestions and things like that. Other question? Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the potential of a serial killer because of those other murders. Were they also committed with an axe?
Well, with a blunt instrument, axe in most cases. But in one case, the Monmouth case, the killer had picked up a length of pipe that had a T fitting at the end and used that. We don't have time to get into the similarities. There are many things. The houses were closed. They had a weapon of opportunity. The killer didn't bring it with them. The Villisca axe was their own axe, which was leaning up in the backyard. The killer found it. The Monmouth, or the Paola, Kansas murder, just before Villisca, was done with a sharp instrument. That's the only one they did not find the weapon. The killer typically left the weapon. And that instrument they thought it was either a small coal pick, or a mason's hammer, because it had a sharp side to it. The other thing was that in most cases it looked like the killer was not satiated with one murder, but explored another, which, by the way, takes us back to Xenia Delaney on the couch with the turning doorknob. And in that case, the door was locked and they couldn't get in, and she heard the person go back down the stairs. She got up, saw it was 2:10 in the morning, and tried to look out of an upstairs window, and testified that she was unable to see the person walking down the stairs because it was too steep, too close to that building. But that's always, you raise the possibility that the killer killed the people, left the house, and looked for another light that would attract or suggest there was someone there. In Colorado Springs, they committed 2 murders. They killed a family and literally went next door, well, actually across the street, and killed another family. So there was a double event there. In Ellsworth, Kansas, they killed a family of 5, and then a fellow was reading late and sitting up in the front room of his house, and he heard someone jimmying the screen on the back door. And he went back there, and they had taken the screen off of the windows. And, you don't have any proof that they were associated, but the houses were only 2 blocks away, 2 blocks apart. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I came in late, so maybe I missed something, but.
Not really. The Rundles will try to get presenting now.
I just wonder, because you mentioned that the minister took the train.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, how close was the house to the train tracks? And were any of these other murders close to train tracks?
The other murders were closer than Villisca. Villisca was the furthest away from the train, but all houses were pretty close to train tracks in 1912. In Iowa, I read a statistic that there wasn't a town further than 7 miles from a railroad in 1910 or whenever the statistic came out. And so it was, there were no cars to speak of. They were just coming in. You didn't have trucks, you didn't have buses. You didn't have any transportation except the train and horses and so on. So Villisca is about 8 blocks. Now these are not big city blocks. These are short, these are smaller. But there's been a lot of talk about those who were trying to prove it was a serial killer, that he could get off of the train and come up. It's a straight line from where the train goes to the house. And if he was just walking up that street, he would come to the thing, but he would have to walk several blocks to do that. Well, let's see, we got a lot. I'll get to one back here and we'll get to it. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there was bacon that was sitting next to the axe. Did they find meat at other places too? Was that another similarity?
No. The bacon was apparently their own bacon because there was a full slab in their pantry, and it looked like now the investigative knowledge or capacity of the day and of the people in a small town is pretty limited. It didn't occur to anybody to take the 2 pieces of bacon and fit them together to see if they were from the same, but it was just assumed, and everybody agreed that it was probably that way. That figured more in the Kelly case than the other. When he was in the mental hospital in Washington, D.C., he had a habit of stealing pieces of meat and putting them in his room. And he was mentally unstable, even more so than I. But anyway, he so that pointed in that direction. There was no explanation for the bacon. None of the police, none of the people, even the people creating rumors, talking about it, who knew nothing about it, they came up with wild things that it was a kit, part of the food of a tramp, and he forgot it and left it there. But if in fact he cut it off and put it there and then forgot it, and on and on like that. The only other theory came from a fellow named Thacker. George Thacker was a head of the Oregon Prisoner Aid Society, which was a group that would help prisoners who were released from jail and or state prisons, and help them get jobs, find housing, things like that. It was a support group. And he must have been recognized as an expert in, criminology, something like that, because the Iowa Attorney General Havner wrote him a letter in 1917 before the Kelly trial started. And he included a description of the scene and a description of Kelly and asked for his opinion as to what he did. And he said, well, the bacon is the key factor. That the bacon was used as an artificial vagina while the killer masturbated after he killed him. And that's why the girl downstairs was brought down in the bed and posed with her undergarments removed and her nightgown pushed up over her waist. And nothing came of that. It wasn't used in the trial that I'm aware of. But that's the only other theory that I'd heard about it.
Okay, all right, sorry. I wish the bacon had not been the last thing we talked about. But Gail needs to draw our YouTube portion to a close, but stay where you are. There's a bit more to talk about.
Wow, that's a tough one to follow, isn't it? I want to point out that many of you have a survey on your chairs, and there's also a QR code on it that can take you to an online survey just asking for your opinion on this program, if you've been to any of the other Iowa Files programs, and most importantly for me, do you have any ideas? Any other topics that you would like to learn more about? I think it's really important also to point out that Kelly and Tammy are Emmy Award-winning filmmakers. This is not their only project. Fourth Wall Films, please look it up, and you can find some really amazing movies about the Iowa's own Gene Seberg, and other topics. So that's Fourth Wall Films. I want to thank everybody who came here today. There is more information about projects and things that are happening with the Historical Society. Save the date for Saturday, October 3rd for our huge, awesome Jubilee. And thank you to the Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Library, the West Des Moines Library themselves. They are awesome. Polk County Supervisors, Bravo, Greater Des Moines, and our members and donors. So we'll see you next fall.